you consider yourself a slow reader? Do you start off a year with a resolution to read more books, but before long you find yourself straggling behind your goals? Or maybe a book is too large and you begin to wear out trying to get to the end of it, wishing you could just read 3 times the pace you do. Well, in this video, I'm going to be giving advice to anyone who considers themselves a slow reader, or maybe advice for those who want to read larger novels. So, without further ado, let's get stuck in, shall we? After the initial excitement of looking at books, maybe just standing in a bookshop, thinking of all the delights, and we imagine ourselves sort of having read them. If you consider yourself a slower reader, you probably suddenly get that feeling of intimidation and then almost a lassitude, you know, that mental and physical drop in energy, because you realise that because you're a slow reader, it's going to take you so long to get through a book like War and Peace, that is it really worth the effort? We want to have read it, but doing the reading is a bit of a problem. But it doesn't change the fact that we want to read it. Now, if that's you, I want to tell you straight away that the answer to this problem is not taking a speed reading course. Of course, if you learn to read faster, okay, that could be helpful, but it doesn't necessarily make you enjoy the book more. In many respects, the first bit of advice that I'm going to give you is the most important advice of all, and it's this. Your struggle with reading, if you feel you're a slower reader, is not so much your reading pace as it is your impatience and dissatisfaction. Now just let that sink in. The problem's not so much our reading pace as it is our impatience and dissatisfaction. Now what's so great about this is impatience and dissatisfaction are internal features. We can change them. And when you do, a whole new panorama opens to you in the way that you perceive reading. Now I'll give you an example. I'll just grab a pile of books. Okay, so look at all these books here. They're all big uns, apart from the top one. Wuthering Heights, Count of Monte Cristo, Vanity Fair, Ulysses, Anna Karenina, Martin Chuzzlewit, The Decameron, Middlemarch, and the magnificent Les Miserables. Now, we all want to have read these books. We all want to know what the stories are and feel that we've been infected by the brilliance of the writing on the page. I'll just put these down a minute. But therein lies the problem. When we're reading a book, say The Count of Monte Cristo, we start off all pep and ginger and vim, and it's a very enthralling read, so we get quite a way into it. But then, because we want to read so many books, we start looking to how far have I got left to get to the end of the book. Well, reading is not about the end of a book. Reading is about the journey in the book, about the pleasure of experiencing it. We're going to come on to this in our second point. But do you notice what's happening? We're becoming impatient to finish the book. Why? Probably because we have so many books we want to have read. And notice I didn't say we want to read. If we're honest, it's we have so many books we want to have read. We want to get past reading them. Now isn't that unusual? The pleasure should come from the reading, not the having finished. And that breeds a huge problem, particularly if you're a slower reader. Because what happens, let's say you have got yourself through 450 pages of the book, and then you realise that there's another 450 pages left to go. Because you want to finish, what does impatience make you do? It starts to make you try to speed read. It starts to make you try and go faster than you can. And what happens then? You start skipping bits. And then your mind gets to the end of a page and you think, I don't know what I've just read, and you have to go back and read it again. That makes you more impatient, which makes the book tiresome. It makes it laborious. No longer are you travelling through a beautiful valley with mountains either side, dotted in flowers, the blue sky and the beautiful white clouds and everything's wonderful, God's in his heaven and all's well with the world, suddenly your experience of the book is you're dragging 10 sacks of potatoes on a broken sledge through a quagmire of mud back in the 1700s in the pouring rain with sodden fields, and your clothes are all ripped. You know, it's not pleasant. And guess what happens? For the majority of people that read a book like The Count, they will get halfway through and stop, and they will never finish the book in their whole life. And the reason is because they think, I can't remember what the story fully was now, so I need to go back and read the first 500 pages again, and that's going to take ages, and I just want to get it read. So they don't start. Do you see how that is what impatience does? The other word I mentioned was dissatisfaction. I'm not going to pick up well, I will. Let me pick some of the books up again. Just got a smaller cluster here. Dissatisfaction. There's a proverb that says, expectation postponed makes the heart sick. In other words, when we desire something and it keeps getting put off, we eventually wear out, we become depressed, we give up. Now imagine you think you're a slower reader and you think, I want to have read these books by the end of the year. Now, what's that? There's 5 of them there. If it takes you a long time to just finish one, and then you see you've still got all these left, but you want to have read them, not read them, to have read them, that's the problem. You can become dissatisfied with how far you've got. And that does one of 2 things. It either sets you off on the second book, rushing, and hence you're doomed to fail. Or you just think, well, I'm too slow a reader, it's not worth my effort, I'll do something else. But I guarantee you something, the following year you'll want to start trying to read again. So dissatisfaction is actually the problem in not finishing books, not your pace of reading. So I want you to think about that. I want you to say this to yourself. It's okay how fast I read. What matters is that I just keep reading and enjoying the story. Okay? You don't need to read faster. You need to be content. Just say, I'm enjoying this. I'm doing this for myself. There is no rush. Be content inside at your own pace. And actually, the things that mess up your reading, which are impatience and dissatisfaction, if you don't have those 2 things, you'll be able to read any book that you like. And it won't matter how long it takes you. So that's point number 1. I want you to give yourself permission to read at your own pace without trying to read faster. I want you to remember that the problem is not how fast you read, it is your own impatience and dissatisfaction at maybe too grand a target. Now, the second bit of advice for enjoying reading when you are a slower reader is absolutely invaluable. I want you to know that as a slower reader, in many respects, you have an advantage over quick readers. Now, that's not saying that quick readers can't gather as much information in as slower readers. That's manifestly untrue. It's been demonstrated that the recall of fast readers is just as good, even not better, than slower readers. However, we're talking about the classics, primarily novels. And reading novels is a different game altogether. When you step into a novel, you step into a world. And when you're in that world, you can either briskly walk up to the main tourist attractions, have a look at them, and then move on. Or you can become a citizen of the place that you are walking in. Something happened to me once in London. It was the Portrait Gallery, the Royal Portrait Gallery. Now, have you ever been to a museum where there's lots of portraits, loads of pictures, an art museum? What do most people do? Now, most of us that go in, we're not educated in the arts, we've got no background in that. We know that they're supposed to be, you know, great pieces of civilization somehow. So we go in there and we pootle through the rooms, going from one picture to the next picture, quick look round, to the next picture, another look round, and so on and so forth. Now, I was in the Royal Portrait Gallery and I came across these two chaps who were sat on one of the benches just looking at this big picture, which, frankly, I don't know what the picture was, frankly, didn't look that interesting. It just looked like a group of people, and not even famous people. And I walked around the room and looked at everything and read the little bit underneath all the pictures. And I went to these guys and they were still looking at this one picture, and I thought, oh, they must be like art students or something. And I said to them, can I ask you something? Why have you took all this time to look at that one picture when I've looked at the whole room? Are you studying that one picture for like a course or something? And they said no. And I'll never forget what they said to me, because this applies to reading good literature. They said, you cannot see a picture in just a few minutes. That, I want you to let that sink in. It's a bit like what Sherlock Holmes said to Watson. You know, you look, but you don't see as you take it in. They were saying people that are walking around and just quickly looking at the picture, they can never take in what's in that picture. They'll never notice any specific details about the way the picture maybe is divided, the way the composition is set, the way different facial expressions are being used. There may be just the placement of a hand, the lighting of a window in the background, a cloud. Some of it may not be particularly important to even the artist who painted it. But you have to sit and let the picture come over you, or sort of let you be sucked into it, to inhabit the picture. And you know, I started doing this, and I began without any training, any knowledge, getting really wrapped up in certain works of art. So much so that one time, I was at Cardiff, it was the Cardiff Art Museum, and they had a picture of Madonna with Pinks by Raphael. They had that there, and they had it temporarily. So I stood there thinking of what these guys said, and I stood looking at that picture for ages. And I stepped closer to it, and I moved further away. I didn't know if this would make a difference. I really didn't. And it was interesting because someone came up and said, oh, you must be like an art critic because you've been looking at that for ages. And I said, no, not at all. I've just been told that you can't see a picture in a few minutes. And so I'm trying to let it talk to me, but I don't know anything about art. Now, isn't that interesting? That's going to apply to our second point on reading. When you're reading a novel, you are entering a world. You cannot briskly run through that world and actually be part of it. You can't see the world by just reading the story. That's like just going to see the quick sights. That's like just going one painting to the other in the art gallery saying, I've looked at them all and I had a good time and it was lovely. You have to slow down and take the time to see it. And this is where your slow reading pace is actually an advantage. For instance, if you're reading a book, say by Charles Dickens, Dickens is very much a character-driven author. He loves his characters. He spends so much time developing them. He, as an author, used to practice when writing in front of a mirror, trying to make mannerisms, using his voice because he was a very good impersonator. And he would put all of that into a character. Now, in order to really extract the most out of those characters, you have to hear them speak. Now, you can read at 800 words a minute if you're a super reader. But one thing you don't do when you do that is you don't internal monologue. You don't literally hear the sounds of the words. You take them in as a shot on the page. But that means you can't hear the nuances as well of the voice. You may remember the story. You may remember great details, but you're not in the world, a fly on the wall, listening to the conversation. You don't pick up necessarily all of the strains of what's going on. Even the great critic Harold Bloom, who could read a stupendous amount of words per minute, he said, "Many a book I go into and have to force myself to slow down so that I can listen." So as a slower reader, you might be reading at the pace that you normally talk, which is about 250 words a minute. Okay, so at that speed, you would read 50 pages in 2.5 hours. Now, that's a good thing, because what you're doing when you read a book is you want to immerse yourself in the world. You don't want to have read the book, you want to live in the book, breathe the air, see the fog, the pea soup as they called it, feel the soot coming down in those industrial cities, notice the grime in the walkways, behold the vast Corinthian columns of the architecture of great cities and buildings, reside for a while in the back alleyways of Jack the Ripper's London, feel the malevolent breath coming along in the wind which may carry a murder or some darkness with it, or behold and feel the sun shining down, or the brush of the breeze upon the face like in Wordsworth's Prelude. You want to be there, not race through there. And to that end, there's a way you can read books which will really give you loads out of it. And at the end of this video, I would like you to go and watch my other video, which is on how to read a book properly, or how to read a book well, I think I've called it. I'll put the link in, but go there straight after this video, because you'll see how it factors into you if you feel you're a slower reader, how that's actually to your benefit. So that's the second tip. If you feel you're a slower reader, notice I have not asked you to learn to read quicker. I've actually told you to embrace your speed and allow that speed to let you live in the pages. And remember, if we've got rid of impatience and dissatisfaction, we no longer are rushing to have read the book. We're not interested in the finish, we're interested in the experience. And one other thing regarding that is being vastly read is not being well read. I know plenty of people who have read loads, and yet, far more than me, and yet in conversations they've listened to a few talking and gone, I never got that out of the book, I just remember the story. Well, you see, they just went to the tourist sites, the quick points of the tale. They never stopped to become a citizen of its pages. So let's move on to a brilliant tip now, the third tip. So this tip is called What 10 Pages at Bedtime Looks Like. By now you should already realise, and I hope you're getting a sort of a bit of an energy, a bit of an inspiration to just get on with reading and enjoy the reading, not trying to finish the book, okay? It's going to take a bit of mental adjustment. You'll still find yourself being impatient and desiring to read more than maybe your speed allows. Work against that. Just say, I am living in the book. You will get far more out of it than reading lots. But now, I'm going to give you a bit of advice if you're a slower reader, or you're just looking to read more, or you're trying to break through the big books. And it's this. Get into a habit. It could be any part of the day, but I'm going to give you this one. Go to bed a bit earlier, half an hour earlier at night, and read just 10 pages of a book. Every single night. You don't need to take a break because every night you have to go to bed. So just make sure you go to bed half an hour early, or stay up half an hour later while you're sat in bed reading. 10 pages. Now, if we get rid of impatience and become satisfied with just 10 pages a night, something remarkable will happen for you, no matter what your pace of reading is. Let me show you what that is. I'm going to pick up a book. All right. Random one I picked up here, Vanity Fair. So Vanity Fair, Thackeray, phenomenal piece of work, very sweeping, A huge cast of characters. One that most people would like to have read, but many people have read a quarter of or half of, then tired out through impatience and never gone back to. Well, let me tell you how many pages it is here. 743. Okay, well, what does that tell us? If you were to read 10 pages a day, you would need 74 days to read it. Now, I say 10 pages, not just because it's a round number. On average, most chapters are around 10 pages. Sometimes they're 11, sometimes they're 20, but often you'll get ones that are 4 or 5 pages, so it balances out. Now, 74 days. We often, when we're feeling impatient or dissatisfied with our amount of reading that we've done in our life, we often think, right, I just want to get this behind me. Wouldn't it be great if I read this in a week? And then what happens? Instead of that bright valley and mountains and beautiful scenery of a book, we end up in the potato field with the rain and the wind and the mud and the bleakness, okay? And it becomes hard. And what will actually happen is it can break you for the rest of your year's reading. I spoke to a professor once, and he said, because, yeah, we were talking, he just said, how many people go to university because they love reading and they want a literature degree, and by the end of the degree, they no longer want to read because they've had to plough through so much rather than just enjoy the experience. So, by doing 10 pages a day, what will happen is in 74 days, you will have finished Vanity Fair. Look at the size of that, okay? But better than that, by only reading 10 pages, guess what you're able to do as you read it? You're able to be a citizen. You can stop. Now, the video I mentioned that you must go and watch at the end of this talks about annotating. If you only take 10 pages, you have time to let those 10 pages sink in, to become more familiar with the names, maybe to spend a bit of time picturing the scene and designing it in your head, rather than racing on to get more of the story. Now, of course, you can go further if you like, but if you just stick to that discipline, in less than 3 months, you'll have knocked off a book like this. But it gets better. And remember, that's just sitting in bed. I'll show you how good it actually gets. 10 pages a day by the end of the year will have given you that stack of books read. Just sitting in bed, almost as if you've done nothing. You'll have read Vanity Fair, Wuthering Heights, Ulysses by James Joyce, Anna Karenina, and The Count of Monte Cristo. That's what you can get through in 1 year at 10 pages a day. To put that in other terms, if you don't necessarily want to read the big books, 10 pages a day will allow you in a year to read Brideshead Revisited, Perfume by Suskind, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, Great Expectations, 1984, Moby Dick, Pride and Prejudice, Frankenstein, 12 Years a Slave, and Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. And one's fallen off here, which would be the book Dom Casmurro by Machado Giazis. That by doing 10 pages a night in bed. But those 10 pages are flavourful pages. You will roll them around your mouth like a sweet chocolate or a fine wine. You will walk amongst the pages. You will hear the voices of the people. You'll have time to make your own personal notes in those 10 pages. And they will begin to speak to you. They'll begin to inform you, to change you, to move you, to argue with you. And even though some may read 50 books in a year, 100 books in a year, the chances are they won't be as conversant or familiar as you are with these 11. Now, I hope that this video has inspired you. I hope it's made you get excited. The hardest of the tips to apply is the first one, to change impatience and dissatisfaction. Rather than say, I want to read X amount of books a day, I want you to say to yourself, I am going to do tip number 3. I'm going to make it a habit of mine to read 10 pages a day. Now, you might be thinking, I can read more than that. Great. By all means, read more than that. but make sure you read 10 pages a night in bed. And something you can mix with this, let's say you were reading a shorter book. So for instance, I've got Patrick Susskind's Perfume here, pretty short, 250 pages or so, thereabouts. You might just want to sit and read that, maybe 40, 50 pages a day. But if you go to bed at night, say with Martin Chuzzlewit, which is about 800 pages, and read 10 pages of Chuzzlewit per night, you would still knock this off your list during your own reading, and then other books through the month. But all of a sudden, on month number 3, you'll have suddenly also got through Martin Chuzzlewit as a bit of a bonus. So that's another way of how to read big books as well without tiring out, is to read a little of them every single day. I'm going to leave you with an illustration. Did you know that when you eat good chocolates, so if someone's bought you, like you in Britain, you buy Thornton's chocolates for people because they're sort of nice, but really good chocolates are like Godiva chocolates, you know, from London. Amazing. Now, the temptation for most people is you want to try all of the flavours, and we eat them rather quickly. But did you know, I've been told on good authority, that the right way to eat chocolates is to have one, to put it in your mouth, to suck it gently, not bite it, so that your mouth can coat in the chocolate first. And then when you bite it, the innards will come out and you get this flavour. But once you've finished the chocolate, you should take around 10 minutes before you eat the next one. Why? Because the next one will immediately overpower the first one. You will lose the flavour of that amazing chocolate you had first. And because it's still at quite an intense level, it will interfere with the next chocolate. In fact, most children, don't they? They guzzle chocolates one after another. If you've ever done that because you're watching TV or you're just feeling depressed, you'll know that you can't really get all the nuances. But if you take time between each one, you're savouring it. It has an aftertaste, an afterglow, which is pleasurable and memorable. But if you eat chocolate one after another, you soon think, I can't remember what those other ones were like at the beginning. What a waste when they're such fine chocolates. The same is true with classic literature. Never race it. Never force yourself to get through it, because you lose its flavour. And then you dash into the next book in order to get through it, and you wash away the experience of the bygone book. But if you read it slowly, if you read it at your comfortable pace, and like I say, watch the other video I've recommended so you know how to get even more. I give examples on how to annotate, and it will excite you with what you can get out of a single page. When you do that, you're left with this permanent aroma which is linked to your memory, so that you'll see the book on a shelf one day and you'll remember when you read it. You'll remember certain scenes about it where you stood in the streets or in the halls or in the churches, and you'll be there once again. But if you're just reading to cover reading, all those flavours are lost in the next flavour of a book, and they all merge into one. So, what do you do if you're a slow reader? You embrace it. By all means, if you can learn to read faster, as long as it remains comfortable to you, do that. But don't read fast in order to just whiz through books. You will ruin the experience. And remember, if you do go slowly, that has its own value. It allows you to spend time in the area, to soak up the atmosphere. And for me especially, as a Dickens lover and a Shakespeare lover, to hear the voices which reveal so much about the characters, who at the end of the day are everything in a story. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please, please, please let me know in the comments what you thought. Your comments help this video get promoted by YouTube, so please like it and comment. And by all means, especially if you're in education, share this video with others, but please share it with your book groups that you might belong to, and share it on your Facebook, because so many people could get into reading if they got rid of the idea that they're too slow. So do the world a favour share this video. Until the next time, I wish you joy in your reading.